carried and that topic concluded for now. Now, we passed a motion earlier that it was unanimous too, that we would go to the end of business. So that is the motion that binds us at the moment. So I need some guidance on that. At 5 o'clock, we have a delegation downstairs, and a number of people have accepted to go to that, and the mayor definitely has to go. So is there anybody, I think Councillor Filipino, you are expected at that as well, you know?
There's indications that people will stay.
But do we have indications, Jacques, thank you. Do we have indications that we can go the distance, members, because there's a statutory obligation to deal with the private plan changes? Is that correct? I'm staying. So could we just have our hands up, stay to the end of business, please? Okay, we're getting a bit light. Okay, well, let's keep going. Let's proceed now. Okay. So we'll go to item 11. Do we have the staff members available?
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to item 11, and item 11 is on page 57 of your print agenda. And we'll hear from Fiona Sprott, and who's our team leader of planning for this one, and John Dogood. Fiona, would you like, is it for you to leave?
We're about to lose quorum.
Well, we're about to lose a quorum. Please don't leave, councillor. We've lost a quorum if you walk out the door. But don't. There we go. Lost the quorum.
While Tom stays in the room, we're still going.
So what was the division on that last one?
Just a minute. We need to.
Yeah. So we can proceed right now. I'll let you know when we're.
Because I can go downstairs because my son-in-law.
I won't go to until you come back. We'll get your message. We'll get your message.
Yes. Yeah. Just
I agree.
I think we've got 11, so we can just proceed with.
Fiona, we can proceed. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee members, my name is Fiona Sprott. I'm a team leader in the Plans and Places unit, and I'm just going to run you very quickly, because I know that you've had a very long day already, through the private plan change process. So anyone can make a private plan change request under Clause 21. Clause 22 sets out what is required to be provided. This includes a Section 32 report, which explains the purpose and reasons of the change and looks at the costs and benefits, particularly the opportunities for economic growth and employment. The report also must address the environmental, economic, social and cultural effects, and also the risk of not doing anything. In addition, an environmental assessment of effects must be provided with each private plan change. All this information must be in such detail as corresponds to the scale and significance of the plan change. The Council then has the opportunity to seek further information through Clause 23 and any modification under Clause 24. And then after that, we have 30 working days in which to consider the private plan change and make a decision under Clause 25, which is the purpose for our discussion today. So this is the procedural step that we bring in front of you as the Planning Committee to determine whether to adopt, accept, convert or reject the plan change. And we'll go through each of these in turn. So the Council has the option of accepting a request in whole or in part and proceeding to notify that request. If the Council accepts the private plan change, then it agrees that the private plan change can proceed to notification. It remains a private plan change at this point, and the Council just administers the legal process with costs generally borne by the requester. After submissions and further submissions have been received, the Council then hears the matter and makes a decision on that private plan change. Alternatively, if the Council decides to adopt a private plan change, then the process will continue as if it is a council-initiated plan change. This implies that the council generally supports the change and that it will bear the cost of managing the process. There are advantages and disadvantages to adopting a private plan change. The council might like to do so if it's in the public interest, for example, if it's got matters, section 6 or 7 matters such as heritage features, protecting water bodies or forests, etc., then it might be to the council's benefit to adopt that private plan change and bear the costs. If the council adopts the private plan change, it implies that the council agrees with the direction of the plan change. If the council just accepts a private plan change, then it is not to say one way or the other whether or not the council supports the direction of the change. Alternatively, you can make a decision to reject a private plan change, which means that the plan change goes no further. Councils can reject private plan changes in whole or in part, but only on those limited grounds set out in this slide, and I'll go through those in a minute. It is important to note that the decision to reject a private plan change is a decision that can be appealed to the Environment Court. Furthermore, if council rejects a private plan change, the requestor could still separately make an application for a resource consent. So looking at your reasons for rejecting, it may be that the private plan change is frivolous or vexatious. So these terms are again not defined in the Act, but have evolved through case law to mean things like trivial or without substance, and with regard to frivolous, something that is intended to harass, frustrate, or cause financial cost to the recipient. Any genuine request for a private plan change is unlikely to be frivolous or vexatious. Plan changes are expensive and time-consuming processes, and we don't see vexatious plan changes brought before the council often. Timing is an important part of rejecting plan changes. This is, as discussed by the chair of the Albert Eden Local Board this morning, the council and the community have been through an extensive process in the creation of the Auckland Unitary Plan, and the Act protects that process and ensures certainty to the community for a period of 2 years. This period of certainty, which is protected by the Act, is now over. The Unitary Plan became operative in November of 2016, and therefore the 2-year moratorium on private plan changes finished in November of last year, which is why we're seeing a raft of plan changes coming through. In the future, once the plan change has been once the plan is operative, there is still a 2-year protection on consideration of matters. So if the council promulgate a plan change through a structured planning process and then some zoning changes, that process is then protected for a further 2 years. Looking at sound resource management, we talked about this briefly at the last committee, and you will have received Karina's legal memo on these matters. That memo sets out the main case law on what is sound resource management practice. Again, it's a term not defined in the Act itself, but in Mallory Corporation versus Rodney District Council, the High Court found that because there is a lack of definition of the term, it must, if it is to have any meaning, get tied back to the purpose and principles of the RMA. Therefore, with regard to private plan changes, the High Court has found that sound resource management must inevitably involve a course merits assessment. This should not look at the full merits of the proposal too strongly, but just enough to determine whether or not the proposed plan change would not accord with the principles and purpose of the RMA, in which case it would not pass the threshold for acceptance or adoption. Most private plan changes we see before the council are to rezone pieces of land. Zoning is an important RMA tool, and it is within sound resource management. So replacing one zone which has been approved through the Schedule 1 process with another zone which has also been approved through the Schedule 1 process is often within the accordance with the principles and purpose of the Act, because it's been through the Unitary Plan already. Other mechanisms, such as the use of precincts, are also mechanisms which are within sound resource management, having been tested through the Unitary Plan and found to be in accordance with the principles and purpose. Where, for example, a requester might run into trouble is where if they are proposing something which is clearly going against the purpose of the Act. So, for example, going against an environmental bottom line from a national environmental standard. If proposed rules permitted contamination of a source of human drinking water, for example, that would be against the NES and therefore would not be sound resource management practice. It is important to consider at this point that Clause 25 does not open up the discussion to examine the full merits of the case, only to look at that course merits assessment in terms of sound resource management practice. Finally, you can convert a private plan change into a resource consent. Resource consents grant permission for an activity, while private plan changes alter the plan itself. A plan change normally provides greater flexibility in terms of development options and long-term management for the developer. However, the RMA does not require that they do one or the other. In fact, an applicant can choose to do both. If a requester wants to progress a specific development, including the design of proposed buildings and materials, then maybe it is better to do this as a resource consent. If, alternatively, the requester realises that they would be a non-complying activity, for example, and almost certainly be refused consent, then the requester may put aside their specific proposal and decide to propose a plan change that changes the provisions to allow their site to have a more flexible approach. If the requester is proposing a zone change, then clearly that cannot be done under a resource consent. Section 9 doesn't provide for it. However, if they are proposing specific provisions to change a site's development controls through blanket changes to the standards, for example, then that may be able to be done through a resource consent. So each case should be looked at in its own merits. So that was just a really super quick run through, but once a private plan change has become notified, it then goes to a hearing. Council can make a submission if it wants to amend the plan change beyond the scope of what was proposed. The council then makes a decision, and that decision can be appealed to the Environment Court. So sorry, that was super quick, but we are happy to take questions.
Thank you, Fiona. That was very good. Thank you. Questions on that? Councillor Walker.
Sure. So I understand that from what you're saying there, it's possible to
Microphone, please.
convert a private plan change to a resource consent. Equally, well, not necessarily equally, is it possible to convert a private plan change to a council-sponsored plan change?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if a private plan change comes in and you want to have it as a council plan change, then you would just adopt it.
It was the part of the presentation you weren't here for.
Absolutely. I was enjoying some of the nourishment.
Other questions on this? Member Namani, and then Councillor Casey.
Hi, just one question, and while it's focused at this, I just wanted to get clear we've got a number of private plan changes to consider, and the approach around to forward the private plan change to iwi authorities is variable across those. Is that a timing issue? Is it a timeline issue based on our previous meeting? It just doesn't appear to be consistent.
Through the chair, as we discussed at the last meeting, there is some ambiguity in the RMA as to whether a private plan change applicant has to send a draft of the plan change to iwi authorities, receive feedback, and then amend the Section 32 report and potentially the plan change or not. So there's still some ambiguity. We're saying it's best practice. We think that was the intent of Parliament when they made amendments to the RMA last year or 2017. So we are encouraging all private plan change applicants to follow the same process as Council will do for its own plan change, i.e. send an early draft to all iwi, receive feedback, amend the Section 32 supporting report and the plan change if necessary. Most applicants that we've talked to so far are more than happy to engage. Some of them have pushed back a little bit in terms of sending a draft and having to make changes to the Section 32. So as we said at the last meeting, what we will do with the four on the agenda today, if they are accepted as recommended, we will send the drafts to iwi, we will seek feedback, and then we will pass it on to the applicant and work with the applicant to update the Section 32 reports. So that's kind of where we're at with things.
Okay, it just perhaps another question. Is it ambiguous, or would it be good to get clarity around whether it is or isn't? Through it, like, would a legal opinion help or not?
Well, we have had legal advice, and the advice says that
It's ambiguous.
it leans in favour of requiring applicants to do it. So that's where we're trying to lead things. But ideally, yes, we would it is something we should really be picking up with the Ministry for the Environment, and we'll certainly be passing that on.
Okay, and just one more question, and really, I'm asking it now, it probably answers for the future ones, is when the reports look at council group impacts and views, are there other thresholds potentially that need to be there? Like for example, if there was an identified site of significance in an area that might directly impact, and I'm just saying generically, would its destruction by, well, I guess it's not, it's a plan change, but would that be seen as a sound resource or unsound resource management issue if you were to move it forward, knowing that there was a identified site of significance in the area that you're looking at plopping perhaps a private plan change enabling a development?
In my view, that is the sort of thing that's potentially moving towards being not in accordance with sound resource management practice, depending on what the plan change was seeking. But if it was clearly seeking to destroy a known identified site of significance to mana whenua through a plan change, with no support from iwi, you are starting to get into the realms of really that's purpose of the RMA. Right up there is protection of sites of significance to mana whenua.
Okay, that was just a
cultural heritage. So yeah, it will be heading in that direction.
Okay.
Without seeing the specific plan change. But,
yeah, I just wondered what drove the subheadings on one plan change as opposed to another or another or another. But
yeah,
it's good. It's all right. Thanks.
Councillor Casey.
The process for local boards making a submission, do they integrate with us? Is it one submission with them and as part of it, or is it two with us and them?
So, through the chair, if council makes a submission, then we would include the views of the local board as a section of the council submission, in very much the same way as we did with the unitary plan. You may recall council made a submission on its own unitary plan to largely make some improvements, recommend some improvements to the hearings panel, and with that, roughly 16 of the 21 local boards attach their views to the council submission. So we'd have the same process if there was a council submission. If there isn't a council submission, then the local board views will be sought by staff and included in the staff or consultant report for the hearings. So there will always be an opportunity for local boards to present their views to the hearings panel, whether or not there's a submission. And we've agreed that with local board services, and we've followed that process to date on council plan changes and potentially these private plan changes.
Do we speak to our submission?
In most cases, yep, we would speak to our submission if we made a
Is that
submission.
you that does it? I mean, you as in not us.
So we would bring that back to the planning committee to determine whether or not there should be a submission on these plan changes. So there's a 4-month period between accepting and notifying the plan change, maximum of 4 months. We would normally notify much sooner than that. So within that 4-month period, staff will come back to the committee with a view as to whether the private plan change warrants a submission. In some cases, we would probably recommend there's no need for a submission, but maybe on some things that are more controversial or where council needs to make its position clear, we would recommend a submission and bring that to the committee.
Thank you. Nice waiata for the soundtrack. Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll seek your guidance. I'm wanting to talk about one of the specific private plan change requests we've got, or are you just wanting to talk to the principals at this stage?
I think
if we could leave that for
probably
the
good to stick to the principles for now and then wait till the plan change that comes up. Is that?
Thank you. That's fine.
On that subject, or shall we move to item 11?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much. That was really helpful.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in the interest of time, we'll just keep moving with these requests. So this one is the first of 4 private plan change requests on the agenda. This one did come to planning committee last month. The committee did not, didn't agree to accept the recommendation, did not accept the private plan change, but you do need to make a decision. There's a statutory requirement, as Fiona has mentioned, to accept, adopt, reject, or treat as a resource consent application. So we've come back to you with some additional information that you sought. That's provided via Kalinda. It's a memo from Bruce Young, the principal planner, who prepared the report for the agenda. The key issues that you sought feedback on were sea level rise and climate change. Well, there's some fundamental issues here in terms of this plan change, which seeks to rezone the land outlined in blue from from public open space to mixed use. That is the land in blue, is that right? It's possibly on, the next slide. It's a smaller portion of land. It is just the land in black within the wider blue areas. That land in the black rectangle currently has a building. I think it's a part of a garden centre and some car parking. So the plan change seeks to rezone that from open space to mixed use. It is privately owned land. You asked us to come back on the issue of climate change and sea level rise. In terms of the predictions for sea level rise, both based on a 1 metre and a 2-level sea level rise, this is still clear of the coastal inundation areas with a 2-metre high sea level rise, which is, depending on which experts you talk to, at least 100 or more years away before we get anything close to a 2-metre sea level rise. So it's well clear of what the council would normally require in terms of avoiding areas of coastal inundation. The other issue was around feedback from Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei. The applicant has advised that they have followed up with Ngāti Whātua on several occasions, both their consultants and the iwi representatives themselves, and have not received a response. We're not sure why that is. There's no objection. We haven't received an objection from Ngāti Whātua, and I guess our advice remains the same, that notwithstanding the fact we haven't heard from Ngāti Whātua or any other iwi, that would not constitute it being something that we could reject based on contrary to sound resource management practice. And Ngāti Whātua and other iwi will be sent a copy of the plan change on notification if it is accepted, and they can then make a submission and be heard if they do have any concerns. So the third issue, I think, was around coastal access. And in Bruce's memo, there is a bit of a discussion around an alternative form of coastal access through the site that has been discussed with the applicant and is required under their resource consent application, and it's part of a wider network of cycleway, walkway that's planned around this part of the foreshore. So again, that's outlined in more detail in Bruce's memo, but our advice is still the same, that there's nothing in this plan change that would enable the council to reject it.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having those queries addressed and answered. Are there any questions about those points that members asked about?
My question is around sea level rise, coastal inundation, storm surge, and so on. All I can say is the information that I'm aware of, which informs me, is that the circumstance around those issues is far worse than the planning information that I'm presented with. So the consequence is that I'll be voting against it, because I know that, and I do not want to be held responsible at a future point in time. Yes.
Councillor Simpson, and my apology,
I don't have a question, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak when you're ready.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, speaking to now, and it is moved in by Councillor Holston, seconded by the Deputy Chair.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, like last time this came to the Planning Committee, I spoke against it from myself for personal reasons, and I gave those reasons, and they were because I believed the map. One was inaccurate. Ōrākei Road is not a dead end, and there was information missed from Ngāti Whātua. Today I speak against the private plan change on behalf of the Remuera Residents Association and the Ōrākei Local Board. Just by way of context, because you may not know this particular site, this Ōrākei Point development has been to the Environment Court before, to get it to a place where it was a trans-orientated development. It was the first development for Auckland that was supposed to be intensified development on a railway line. Judge Jeff Smith's decision on that, he mentions a couple of points from that Environment Court decision to get it to a TOD that I believe are important to our decision today. The first point is to enable the comprehensive development of Ōrākei Point as an exemplar for a trans-orientated development, but also that should it progress, that the development is done in a comprehensive manner.
Auckland Transport say in point 46 of the paper that they're concerned that the development of the Oireki Point precinct will progress on an ad hoc basis if it's assessed building by building and not as a precinct, which is how it was designed. And this will not result in a coordinated and integrated land use and transport response for both sides of the precinct, which is how it's designed. Staff say that these concerns are more relevant to the assessment at a resource consent stage, but of course this is against what Judge Smith has said as well. He also talks in his findings when he put this together about the importance of open space, remembering that this is open space and it is about to be taken away. He mentions it both in his summary and more details around that. He says that one of the objectives for the trans-orientated development is to create high quality public space both within the Oireki precinct and around its seaward perimeter. That's what he said. That was the reason for it, which offer a diverse range of leisure opportunities. This private plan change takes that away. It takes away that open space and around the seaward perimeter. Now, I'm concerned that the map is inaccurate, as I've said before, and I also refer to the information that we received that was following up from the last point, because the whole purpose of this private plan change is it says that the open space land is no longer needed for the Oireki cycleway that it talks about. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd ask you to go to that Planning Committee memo of the 20th of February, and it's page 186. And here is a map. If you look at me rather than going through, it might be easier. The actual cycleway that the applicant is saying is no longer needed is along the railway line. What we have currently is a walkway, public space walkway that comes, this is being developed by the Oireki Local Board now, comes along here, comes all the way up to this precinct, and it comes into that precinct. What is the bit of green space? What's the bit of green line missing? What is the walkway open space provision missing? And that's the bit that they want to dig into. So by allowing this private plan change to go ahead, you'll never be able to do that. You'll never be able to have that coastal edge available, which is one of the whole reasons when the TOD was put together in the first place. My last concern was the lack of input from Ngāti Whātua. Look, most of you will know I'm chair of the Quality Advice Political Working Party, and one of the key questions for the Maori impact statement for any paper is that are the results of any specific engagement with Māori made clear, including the implications in their view expressed? We haven't had it. This relies on the applicant to find that, and I think that's a bit of a shame. You know, we have huge access to Ngāti Whātua in this council, and no one's actually asked their, members of committees of the whole that actually apart from that iwi, and I think that information could have been easily got if the applicant wasn't able to get it for themselves. I now want to cover the legal reasons, because whilst I represent views from my community, one of the main thrusts for the local board's response is about the legal response. So the legal definition of sound management, we have the option to reject a private plan change under RMA 25 section 4. 18C on the bottom of page 63 says you can request, or part of that request is not in accordance with sound resource management practice. The legal definition of sound management practice is not defined in the RMA. In fact, when the High Court was determining this, it referenced Mallory versus Rodney District Council and said that the words should only be limited to a course scale merits assessment. Course scale merits assessment. Can I have an extension, please?
No.
Thank you.
We do that pretty informally, but you actually have to have a vote. So moved and second. So all those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried.
So when we look at the Oireki local...
But it was not clear on how long the extension was. Sorry to be pedantic, but this is...
Please, I'm getting to the end as fast as I can. When you look at the Oireki local board's input, they only have 4 paragraphs, and the officer's response to the Oireki local board's feedback is that the comments from the Ōrākei Local Board are an assessment of the detailed merits of the request rather than a response to the matters set out in clause 25 of Schedule 1. The legal advice that I've had is that actually those 4 points are just a coarse scale. So I'm concluding that Judge Smith, in his Environment Court decision around the TOD, gave 2 clear messages. Don't do it building by building. Keep it together as a precinct, which goes against the private plan change objective. And 2, it keeps the coastal edge, and this doesn't work for it either. I believe that the legal interpretation of this can be covered under section 25.4 C, 18C in the paper, and as we have done before, because it's supported now this time by the Remuera Residents Association, and we have the documentation once again clarified by the Ōrākei Local Board, I'm supporting both of those groups in asking you to reject the private plan change. Thank you.
Can I just clarify, the map error pertained to a bridge that is missing, which is not.
It's not a bridge. Well, it is a bridge. Yes, it is.
No, it is a bridge, and it's not land. And I think we covered this last time.
Yeah,
What's shown on the plan is actually land, and that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about the bridge.
If you didn't know the area, Mr. Chair, it gives the impression that the land it stops, doesn't continue on.
Councillor Bartley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. I'm just going to pick up on some comments. The purpose of the Act is to promote sustainable management of natural and physical resources, also picking up enabling communities to provide for their social wellbeing and foreseeable needs of future generations. I think this private plan change will restrict coastal access. I think it goes against the purpose of the Resource Management Act, so I won't be supporting this. My constituency is quite clear about open space, and even though this isn't my ward, my constituency's thoughts on open space influences my decision in this instance. So I support Councillor Simpson and the Ōrākei Local Board here.
Councillor Lee.
I'll be brief, Mr. Chairman. I oppose the recommendation. I believe the plan change should be rejected. I believe the system here is being gamed. This area of land has long been the subject of debate and contention and controversy in the Ōrākei area. And with the unitary plan and the other consents, including Judge Smith's decision, a consensus or an agreement, a settlement was reached. Now, what had been reached is now being unravelled, and something quite different has emerged, and I'm disappointed that the council is going along with it. I agree with the points raised by Councillor Simpson and Councillor Bartley. The local board opposed it. The Ngāti Whātua have not given any views. However, given the importance of that particular piece of land, and given that it is located in the historic Kohimarama block, which Āpihai Te Kāwau refused again and again to sell, unlike other parts of Auckland, it is clearly very, very important to Ngāti Whātua, and to not have any view, despite the close contacts, as Councillor Simpson has pointed out, we have with Ngāti Whātua, is unsatisfactory. However, I'm also concerned that here is a good example of private open space. And what we are doing is rendering that concept completely meaningless, because it seems a precedent is being set here that a developer, after gaining bonus densities and other advantages by having private open space, when it suits them, can turn around to the council and say, well, I want to develop it now, and unless you want to buy it, I'm going to go ahead. That completely undermines the credibility of the concept of private open space. And given where this open space is in the coastal environment on the edge of the CMA, it's even more disappointing. What on earth happened to the Queen's chain? Where's our principles on that? Gone by the board, apparently, along with hand-wringing over sea level rise and all the rest of it. The fact of the matter is this is extremely vulnerable area, and if you drive along Tamaki Drive in a king tide, it can be inundated. So the whole thing is wrong, Mr. Chairman and members, and I really urge you to support Councillor Simpson and vote this recommendation down.
Councillor Newman.
So I have spoken previously to Councillor Simpson and to Councillor Lee about this matter, and I have very significant issues with the private plan change request from the Ōrākei Point Trustee Limited. The issue is this. I think that the merits of the debate are matters that need to be addressed to the Commissioner, who will consider the plan change, and that will, I would hope, lend itself to a decision which will not be favourable to the applicant. I do take what Councillor Lee has said, and I would expect that the process before the Commissioner will see the debate dominated by expert witnesses, when he is quite right. The democracy will provide for the lay witnesses to go and give their evidence, and that's never very fair. But it's the way that the process should be for requests such as this. I have a feeling that the recommendation won't pass, but I will vote for the recommendation simply as a matter of process. The one other thing I would like to reiterate was a comment that I tried to articulate on email, that I am pretty sure that the outcome from the last meeting of the Planning Committee was that this would be a matter subject to a workshop. I can't recall. I think that's what I understood. I don't think it is wise to bring papers back that were rejected last month to just put it back on the agenda and say, look, you have to accept this. I voted to accept it last time. I will stick to that position, but I think that this has not been a good process in lending itself to gaining support. That's just my view, Chair. I hold to that. I'm uncomfortable voting the way I do on this because I don't think it's been particularly helpful. But I just need to explain to Councillor Simpson that's my position, and it's a position on principle. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holst, please.
Thank you. I just follow on and echo the previous speaker. There is a point at which we are endeavouring to deal with the actual decisions that the commissioners need to consider, and I think we've strayed into that territory. This is by no means accepting the fact that this is a done deal, that it's saying that at the moment we accept it, it then goes through the process, democracy will prevail, and it will go from there. I respect the issues that Councillor Simpson's raised, however, I have no idea where they've come from, who the legal opinions from, and you know, the Ratepayers Association and the local board, fair enough, that's input, but it's not a legal opinion. And I think, as Councillor Newman says, we go through the process, and we can't necessarily play fast and loose, no matter how much we might like to, with the process, because giving it a crack to see if we can stop this without a lot of information could be a very, very expensive crack. And I would rather we go officially into the process and then test it rigorously. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holst. And Councillor Hill.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Chair. And that's the same sort of comments from me. I don't necessarily support the plan change or not. It's the fact that this is a private plan change. Supporting it would be adopting it, which would mean we're suddenly in favour of it. accepting it is accepting it for the process that we have to support. It's disappointing that they're sort of yelling at officers when we can't actually help this coming to council. It's not your guys' magical idea that it's popped up. So, yeah, I had some concerns that we're going a lot into debating the merits when we just had a presentation previous to this item about what we can and cannot do as governors on private plan changes. So I'm not lending my support or opposition to the merits or the plan change at all. That would be adopting it. So I think we need to accept this. Otherwise, yeah, we could get ourselves into a bit of crisis and a bit of money spent on defending why we rejected it. The last time, as far as I could find, the resolution was just bring to the next ordinary committee. So this is the opportunity we have, I guess. But yeah, maybe there does need to be more work. I thought the presentation was good just before, but potentially more on private plan changes as we're going to see a lot more of these come through. So yeah, I support accepting it because I feel like that is our only option at this stage.
Thank you. Member Namani.
Yeah, just to confirm, like the previous speakers, on reflection and with a bit of foresight and being able to have a chance to kind of look at the process, I also support the recommendations. I'm actually keen for this proposal to be put to iwi and accepting the recommendations is the only way that that can go out there, so that mana whenua can have a say, and not just Ngāti Whātua o Rākei. Kia ora.
Thank you. Other speakers? No, and just Councillor Fletcher.
Mr. Chair, I find this really difficult because I've followed this for a very long period of time, from when I was an MP for the area through to Legacy Auckland City, and while I respect the opinion of others in terms of the process, this is just blatant opportunism as I see it, and it's been a very long and painful history. So yes, I don't want to see council exposed to a long and lengthening legal process there, but we know at so many levels this is not a transport orientated development. We know that it just doesn't fit with any of the criteria that we establish for ourselves there, and I think it's sort of an insult to Ngāti Whātua. I think it's an insult to all of the activists who've worked for a long time. I think back on Neville Darrow and all, it's just gone on for such a long time. I'd like to support the councillor on this particular one. I was actually going to ask questions of the officer earlier, and then I was told to wait until we came to the specific items, and I've got a specific question on the next item. But I wonder whether I can ask the officers to address the concerns that have been raised, just briefly, to see, I don't want to expose council to risk, but nor do I want to see this sort of opportunism, because it's this stuff that puts the whole process into disrepute, in my opinion. Mr. Chairman, would you be willing to?
Yeah, through the chair, very quickly, I think, just to be clear, and I think councillors are generally understanding this, we are not saying as officers that on the merit we support this plan change, as other councillors have mentioned. That is a matter for the independent hearings commissioners to determine, and council will present evidence before those commissioners on the detailed merits. So just to be clear, we're not supporting on the merit, but on a course assessment, there's nothing that's jumping out to say it's fundamentally contrary to the RMA in terms of its sustainable management principles. In terms of the public open space, I think we do need to be very clear, and I think again councillors are clear, that it's privately owned land. It is zoned public open space, but as with all private land, without covenants on it, they could prevent public access at any stage if they chose to do so. And I guess a discussion about the previous schemes, going back to the Legacy Auckland City Council, my understanding is that the whole basis of that original scheme was on the presumption that council would acquire the open space around the perimeter, or would ultimately take that land on board. So I guess time has moved on. So, you know, we are in a new council now. We can't prevent them from applying for this private plan change request, but a lot of the issues we do feel are ones that can be addressed at the hearing and not relevant at this particular juncture.
Thank you. Councillor Bartley?
This is just what I was thinking, and perhaps it's a question you can respond to. It seems to me like we do have an opportunity to sidestep the commissioner process because we get to vote on this. And so it seems to me that as councillors, we do have that discretion. So if we had questions around the process and we didn't trust the process or had issues with it, and there is an issue here of opportunity, whatever, yeah, that word, then this is the opportunity to nip it in the bud before it goes that far, isn't it?
But I guess opportunism is not one of the grounds for rejection. So if we think there is some opportunism here, that's fine. But I guess in the council, if you were to reject it, we do have to provide reasons for this to have any chance of surviving in the Environment Court. So we will need some form of reasons given to support the reason for rejection, and opportunism or speculation about what opportunism, that's just won't pass muster. It has to be some of the other more fundamental environmental planning, cultural issues that you might identify as being the reason for a rejection, without hearing any evidence or submissions or so on. Yeah.
Okay. I think we'll go to the vote on this one, and we'll just determine it that way. But I think I heard earlier that we're creatures of statute and we're required to abide by statute. And the presentations today were all about the law from Fiona. So keep that in mind. So look, let's just put this to the vote. Should we just take a
division? So sorry, I could just talk you perhaps through the process about how this would need to work. So if that's okay, Mr. Chair. So if you do not accept this resolution, I'm just working on some wording that you would then need to determine that you then take a vote to determine that the plan change was not in accordance with sound resource management practice or part 5.
Mr. Chairman, you have already called the vote.
Okay, sorry, I was just trying to assist. That's fine.
Discuss
Yeah.
the next step after.
Okay, look.
Because it sounds like it could be interpreted.
No, it's not. It's not. The Chief of Strategy is just outlining what the next steps are. And so I think what the Chief of Strategy is trying to help us with, if the vote is lost.
Point of order, you've called for a vote. You need to proceed.
Okay, and I will. Go to the vote. A division has been called. Who called the division? Because I need to record that.
Yeah, Councillor Fletcher.
Councillor Simpson called the division. We'll record it as Councillor Simpson.
So a division for the motion that's on the screen currently, Councillor Darby.
4.
Councillor Bartley.
Against.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor.
Yes.
Councillor Collins.
Against.
Councillor Filippino, who's not here. Councillor Fletcher.
Against.
Councillor Hills.
For.
Councillor Hoss.
Aye.
Councillor Lee.
No.
Councillor Newman. Member Namine. Councillor Sayers.
Against.
Councillor Simpson. Councillor Stewart.
Against.
Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson.
Against.
Councillor Young.
I don't have that.
Sorry.
So that has lost 7 votes to 10. So now I need to go to Megan because we can't fabricate the reasons. The reasons need to be as they were spoken by those who spoke against. Otherwise, it puts the staff in a very difficult position. So Well, you had the opportunity to identify the reasons and your arguments against, and I don't want to put the council in a position where this is being broadcast, this is live, and I don't want to find the council in a High Court judicial review fabricating reasons that were not conveyed at the meeting. It
Point
can't
of order,
do
Mr.
that.
Chair.
I will ask.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of,
I don't know that advice is appropriate. You can't second guess what reasons I had. I only gave one reason. I have other reasons. So I do not concur with your ruling there, sir. And I'm happy to seek legal advice around that.
we'll take
If I stand
the
corrected.
Chief of Strategy will now address the next step is we need to establish the reasons.
So my advice to you is I've drafted a resolution that you could pass. It's entirely up to you, but my very strong advice is, given the decision you've made, you need to link it back to the reasons for rejection in the Act. And so that is what you see up there.
Councillor Hulse.
So I have a question, and I guess my question is how we deal with the fact that politics seems to have taken over sensible and sound and judicially prudent decision making. This plan changes and the RMA are a judicial process. I'm sorry the councillors who are the most enthusiastic about gerrymandering and fabricating reasons to turn these issues down, their words, not mine, are not prepared to listen. We need to understand what the sensible legal advice is, and that's what our manager, our strategy, our new strategy person, sorry Megan, I've forgotten your official title, our chief of strategy, was endeavouring to advise us, as is her job. We're trying to steward ratepayers' money sensibly and not put ourselves in harm's way by spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a judicial review that is quite frankly pointless. So I think everyone now needs to grab a coffee, apply ourselves sensibly, not to manufacture some sort of flimsy reason for voting against something that some of us have put forward, but something that will actually stack up in court. And Mr. Chair, I resent the fact that I have to sit here now for another God knows how long while we actually work through the legality of what I think was a fairly ropey political decision, but I will hold my end up. So my question is, can we have the legal advice quite clearly on just what is expected of us, because it's not actually being listened to. If we can have it in unequivocal terms that possibly can be understood.
Thank you. Do you want to lead on that?
Well, through the chair, I can get Karina up as well, but given that you have chosen not to accept this plan change, which we had advised is legally, we can't support, this, with Karina and I, is the best wording that we're suggesting to you, that you at least have a wee bit of face in the court. We're not suggesting we would win by any show, but nonetheless, this would be the best wording that we suggest for you now, given your decision.
So my question is, just to give Karina a moment, Mr. Chair, with your indulgence, can you tell me roughly what it costs to address legal challenges of this nature?
Through the chair, I'm sorry I can't give you a cost estimate. All I can say is that with this particular challenge, if the applicant was to challenge it, they can take an appeal to the Environment Court. So it's not a matter of a judicial review, which would, in my view, be more costly. But what Megan has tried to point out is that since you've made the decision not to accept, you now need to make a decision to either adopt, which I think is probably not your choice from what I've heard of the discussion. You need to reject, or you need to consider it as a resource consent. So of the grounds of rejection available, that's the only one that we can see as even possible for you to use. and having identified that ground, you're going to need to reject because that's your only decision left available to you.
Councillor Newman.
I respect those who voted against it. That's fine. That's their position. What I do think is that the reason for the rejection of the application need to just be codified, and maybe if the officers could work with a couple of people who led the arguments, that could be captured, because I do think it needs to be recorded. If we don't accept it, we have to reject it now, as I understand it. I'm not going to do that, but I do think that it would be helpful during the course of this meeting if some words from those who did support the application could just be passed up, so that that could be captured and just resolved maybe by the end of this meeting. And if we can carry on with other stuff over and above that, because I do think there is a statement that we need to affirm in the minutes today that explain why this happened, and the merits of that can be appealed in a judicial process, and that's just the way it will be. And that's about it. But I do think that it needs something. I think words need to be passed up to the officers that this can just be captured before we go home.
I'll ask the Chief of Strategy to respond to that, and thank you.
Through the chair, I understand what you're trying to do, Councillor. In talking with Karina, our view here is the more detail you give, the less stable any position you have in the court would be. You are arguing that it is not in accordance with sound resource management practice, and the more detail you give as to why, that gets further and further into a merits assessment, which is not what you're being asked to do. So my recommendation to you, should you continue here, is to leave it as just like that and no frills or further clarification around that.
Yes, Councillor Simpson. Microphone, please.
Sorry, I just wanted to say to my colleagues that I gave our council staff a heads up of what I was going to say and the points that I was going to raise. So it's not as if that came as a surprise. So just saying, I support where Megan's coming from. What I don't understand is that we should have had the workshop on all this before this came back. That was my understanding. I believe it's now scheduled for tomorrow. That's the first thing. The second point around this that I don't get is that we are the political decision makers around this table, and we were asked for our political view on that, and that's what was given. What I do not still get in this process, if it wasn't available for a debate, why was it brought for the politicians to have a discussion around this? We either have the ability under the law to have our say politically and give a view, or there is no doubt, no reasonable doubt, and this is the answer. And so those are the 2 points I say in defence of my argument. One, this council, this group of councillors and the mayor haven't been taken through the process like we were asked last meeting, which is supposed to be tomorrow. And 2, I do not understand the difference between the political view and a council delegation that staff have in this process. Thank you.
Okay, so there's some speaking turns now. So is there somebody that would like to move the A and the B, move and second the A and the B, preferably from the side that Councillor Lee, those that opposed it, Councillor Lee and Councillor Fletcher moved and second?
Also, Mr. Chairman, may I just say...
Okay, it's now a moved motion, so you're speaking to it.
So, why I wanted to ask the officer...
Could you put your mic on, please?
Why I requested that I asked some general questions before we got into the actual agenda items, is I'm going to have the same dilemma with the next item. So you get to a point, as Councillor Simpson has said, where you have got the opportunity to express in a representational sense where you sit on an issue, and with the next agenda item, it will be very much one where the opportunity for Southern Cross to have gone and participated in the unitary plan process was available to them. They chose not to do that, and yet we know that the contractual situation that they have undertaken with the Health Board to entertain such a large-scale development leaves you feeling very cynical. Why did they arrogantly decide not to participate in the unitary plan process, but to wait for a private plan change? And I find parallels in what occurred here. Now, I hold the view this is one area where there should be some amendments to the Resource Management Act, because I think it leaves a deficiency. This is not the first time we have been put in this situation. And how do you express your frustration? Yes, we are a creature of statute, but when the statute has a flaw in it, as has been identified today, how do you respond in terms of giving weighting to your representational abilities? And so that is why I expressed it. That is why I'm willing to second that. I don't want to see our officers being compromised, but I do think it would have been easier to have had this general discussion before we got into the specifics of Aoraki or Brightside or anything else. And that is why I wanted to explore and to identify ways in which I could express my frustration with the process. But we are where we are.
And just to remind that there was a resolution to bring it back. So we had to, and it was at the next meeting. So we had to abide by the resolution. And the program, our diaries did not allow for the workshop to be undertaken prior, and that's why Fiona gave us the introduction today. But look, we have done our best, the staff have done their best, and that's why the memos were sent out and then tabled again today. I think there have been numerous opportunities, but look, I'll take all that on board, but the staff have done their very best, as I can see. Are there other speakers to this motion?
Mr. Chairman, I agree with, I'm happy with the wording. That's why I'm happy to put my name to it. Under the law, the council has the power to reject a private plan change request in whole or in part. And this request is not in accordance by the majority view of this council with sound resource management practice. Members around the room articulated those resource management practices which they considered unsound, including the lack of iwi input, the objection to by the local board, open space issues, and Councillor Bartley, I think, even specified Section 5 of the Resource Management Act, which sums up the whole case of sustainable development, so sustainable management and the role of people and communities. So I'm happy with the wording of that, and I suggest that we move on past this and move on to the next business. If officers wish to debrief some of the members who have concerns and articulated those concerns about this particular case, I'm happy to assist and participate, and I'm sure other members would as well. I think we need to get this sorted. This is the second time we've rejected, in effect, this plan change, and I think we just need to move on. We are allowed to vote no as well as yes in a democracy, and this evening we voted no.
Councillor Wayne Walker. Okay, that was a no.
I didn't have that. Let's leave it.
It was the end of the day. Let's put this towards the vote. To the vote. So it's moved by Councillor Lee and seconded Councillor Fletcher. I'll take a division on it quickly, please.
Okay, division on the motion to reject the private plan change request. Councillor Darby.
Against.
Councillor Bartley.
For.
Councillor Casey.
No.
Deputy Mayor.
No.
Councillor Clow. Oh, sorry. Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Hills.
For.
No. Councillor Hulse is gone. Councillor Lee.
Aye.
Councillor Newman.
Against.
Member Namini. Councillor Sayers. Councillor Simpson. Councillor Stewart. Councillor Wayne Walker.
For.
Councillor Watson.
Yes.
Councillor Young.
For.
Motion's carried.
Thank you. Declare that motion carried 10 votes to 5. We'll conclude that item. Thank you, Bruce.